talk about training 1,000, 10,000 PhDs to kickstart Africa's scientific revolution. But nobody talks about what those people will do once they get their degree. And unfortunately, what has happened is we've substituted a brain drain that lost people after high school for a brain drain that loses people after a PhD.
Hello and welcome. I'm Ella Amwaku, your host today, and we have with us Dr. Yaw Bediako, who is a Ghanaian immunologist with broad interest in investigating immune function amongst African populations. He obtained his PhD at Northwestern University and has 2 postdoctoral fellowships. One at the Cambridge Trust and subsequently one at the Francis Crick Institute in London. He's also a faculty at the West African Center for Cell Biology and Infectious Pathogens at the University of Ghana. And quite recently, he was elected as a Callistus Juma Fellow for the Bill Gates Grand Challenges. Yaw is also the CEO and co-founder of Yemaachi, an African biotech company that was founded in 2020. Welcome, Yaw.
Thank you, Ella. It's nice to be here.
Welcome, Yaw. It's good to have you on the podcast. You're the first guest that we have on the podcast, so thank you for being the guinea pig, so to speak. Can you tell us a little bit about Yemaachi? I mean, Yemaachi is really one of the first biotech companies in Africa. What is it that drove you to create Yemaachi?
First of all, thank you for the opportunity to be the first guest on your podcast. I'm sure there'll be much more distinguished and eminent people that will follow on this podcast, but certainly no one can take it away from me that I was the first. So I'll revel in that glory for a while. So yeah, Yemaachi, as Ella said in the intro, is a biotech company headquartered in Accra, Ghana. And our focus is to diversify and improve access to precision oncology across Africa. So briefly, cancer is a growing problem on the continent. It's one of the fastest growing health concerns on the continent. And unfortunately, it's also one of the most neglected concerns on the continent from the perspective of research. While oncology research is vast, the majority of it happens in Europe and North America. And so there's very little data surrounding cancer among African people or people of African descent. And that creates a significant problem given the nature of cancer. Cancer is a genetic disease, which means it depends greatly on the genome of the patient or the person who has the disease. Unlike infectious diseases where you also have a pathogen, you have some external entity that you can study anywhere. Cancer really is very specific to individuals. And as medicine moves into an age of precision medicine, where we are trying to tailor-make therapies based on an individual's genetic background, there's a risk that health disparities will continue to be exacerbated because there is so little data surrounding African genomes or people of African descent. So currently, 70% of global genomic information is from people of Caucasian or European ancestry, and only 2% is from people of African ancestry. So this means that precision medicine is really only precise for Caucasian people. And there is good evidence to show that precision therapies have the lowest effectiveness in ethnic minorities, and especially people of African descent. So Yemaachi is trying to fill that gap. We look to partner with clinicians and health facilities across Africa who are treating people with cancer. And we are looking to build up a knowledge base of genomic and clinical data that can shed some light on cancer among African populations, and that can be used to develop the next generation of diagnostics and therapies for cancer that will be much less ethnicity sort of specific, more ethnicity agnostic, and hopefully work for a broad range of people. The final thing I would say is the African continent is blessed with many resources. Our genetic diversity, or human genetic diversity, is one of those resources. So Africa is the most genetically diverse continent in the world. And our population across the continent really reflects global genetic diversity. And so there's a lot to be learned about human medicine or human health from studying African genomes. And Yemaachi is hoping to be part of that effort, but to do it as an African company, not a huge multinational conglomerate that comes to harvest African samples and does research, but really as an African company trying to solve an African solution using cutting edge technology in an African context, and ultimately to bring benefit, most importantly, to people on the African continent.
Wow, that's amazing. So brilliant. We really want to learn more about that. What is for you the vision for Yemaachi? Say 10 years down the road or 30 years down the road. What would it be like for the continent?
My dream for Yemaachi is to become a powerhouse of research, a globally competitive, not really labeled as an African research company or an African biotech, but really to be a global powerhouse in research that happens to be headquartered and predominantly based in Africa. So that we are first of all recognized as a leader in research, and then second, recognized as African. Currently, our focus is on oncology. Cancer is huge. We could do cancer for the next 20 years and not run out of things to research. Mm-hmm. I suspect we will diversify a little bit, focusing on areas that are relevant to Africa. For the next 5 to 10 years, I think majority of our work will be in cancer. My vision is for Yemaachi to become Africa's cancer research company, but bigger than that, to be a global cancer research company that is focused on trying to help to solve the problem of cancer for people of African descent, but doing so from a global perspective.
Wow. Why Yemaachi, and why did you decide to start Yemaachi?
So the name Yemaachi, everybody says it sounds Japanese, which I guess for a tech company is not necessarily a bad thing. Japan is associated with great technology, so it doesn't hurt for people to say, "Oh, is that Japanese?" They're probably expecting great things. But Yemaachi actually is an amalgamation of three Ghanaian languages. I was trying to find something that would be reflective of more than just one region of Ghana. Obviously, Yemaachi's vision is actually bigger than just Ghana, but since we started in Ghana, I am Ghanaian, majority of the team is Ghanaian. I wanted a name that, well, first, the web domain would be easily available. But secondly, I wanted something that different people in Ghana could identify with, no matter where they were, what part of Ghana they were from. So Yem, in the language Frafra, which is spoken in the north of Ghana, means knowledge. Amachi in Ewe means medicine. And that is a language spoken primarily in the Volta region of Ghana, to the east of Ghana. And then Maachi is a greeting spoken by Twi-speaking people who typically are in the south of Ghana. That means good morning. So you put Yem, Amachi, and Maachi together, and you get Yemaachi, which signifies a new dawn for health knowledge in Africa. So that's what Yemaachi means. A little bit
that's very cool.
We've fallen in love with it, and it's here to stay, hopefully.
And why did you start Yemaachi?
I think Yemaachi is a culmination of a journey, a personal journey. I say culmination, it's almost the beginning of a new journey, I guess. So the end of one and the beginning of an even scarier one. But as a young African student, even in high school, I developed an interest in science. And even, by the end of high school, I knew I wanted to go into some sort of scientific career. I knew I didn't want to go to med school, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I had the opportunity to go to college in the US, and very early was, given an opportunity by one of my professors to start doing research. And that's the first time I was exposed to research, and I realized, that is a science career that does not involve going to med school, but allows me to really engage with biomedical science. So I went through my research training from undergrad through my PhD and then my postdoctoral fellowships, really with a view towards becoming an academic researcher, working at university, trying to become a professor before I was 45, having my own research lab in a university and leading research from the academic side of things, which is a model you see all over Europe and North America. It's a model also you see in Africa. In fact, primarily all the research in Africa is academic. After almost 20 years sort of in the wilderness, as it were, outside of Africa, with a few, with the 2-year stint in Kenya mixed in, I came back home to Ghana and took up a faculty position at the University of Ghana. And I thought I'd arrived. I was at a young, vibrant center, relatively well-funded, with a young director who I really respect and who I wanted to emulate. And in my mind, who I would ultimately replace. When he went on to bigger and better things, that I would take over his center. That's why I came back to Ghana. And I always dream big. I guess I always dream of taking somebody's job. So, not in a negative way, but you have to aspire to something. But anyway, after about 6 months of working in the university, I began to question that vision. Not because I didn't believe in research in the university, but I began to wonder if my vision was a little bit different. Working in universities in Africa is difficult. Universities in general are bureaucratic, no matter where you are. In Africa, they have a certain level of extra spice. And I felt that the time was now to try to do something a bit more radical. The last 15, maybe even 20 years have seen significant investment in capacity building in the sciences in Africa. WACBIP, the center I came to work at, was a result of a World Bank grant. World Bank has ultimately invested $500 million in capacity building in science across Africa. They built a number of centers. Ghana alone has at least 3 of these centers. And all of those centers are aimed at training. We talk about training 1,000, 10,000 PhDs to kickstart Africa's scientific revolution. But nobody talks about what those people will do once they get their degree. And unfortunately, what has happened is we've substituted a brain drain that lost people after high school for a brain drain that loses people after a PhD, which is ultimately much more expensive. So you invest in people all the way to a PhD, but because you don't have anything for them to do beyond the PhD, besides teach at a university, many people end up leaving and going to America or to Europe or elsewhere. I felt that the time had come to complement academic research efforts. Academic research will always be incredibly important in our development, but we have to now start thinking about research, translating our academic research into tangible results that can actually impact people's lives. It's not enough just to publish a paper, but the science has to become a drug. It has to become a test that can actually impact somebody's life. And looking at America and Europe, the way they have done that is through biotech. You have every year hundreds of biotech spin out of universities where young scientists go off and try to make the next $1 billion. And many will fail, but that engine of innovation keeps driving America and Europe's progress in biomedical sciences. So Yemaachi, I felt, was an attempt to show that this can be done in Africa. I don't have a business background, but I have a strong scientific background, and I managed to find a team of people who can complement the skills I have and fill in the gaps that I don't have. So Yemaachi was my audacious attempt responding to the challenges I was facing at the university that risked burning me out and risked sending me back out to Europe or North America. And I felt, instead of leaving because of frustration, let me try and do something new in Africa where hopefully we have a better chance of directly impacting people's lives.
Well, I think it's so impressive what you're doing. It's really changing the way we do research on the continent, the way we train. And you're also trying to address this issue of brain drain. So there are so many academics that are graduating, but they're finding trouble getting jobs. So you're, in essence, creating new jobs, and introducing innovation. I'm curious, what are some of the challenges that you've faced so far in, getting this dream of Yemaachi becoming a reality?
I think the first challenge I faced was a personal one or an internal one. I had to decide to take the risk because I had built up, my whole life was built towards an academic career. And obviously anybody who is in academia knows once you get off the treadmill, things can pass you by. So the first challenge was just deciding within myself that I was going to try to do this. The second challenge was getting the resources. Biotech is extremely expensive. In the East Coast or the West Coast of the US, biotech spring up every day and investors are used to biotech. The same is not true for Africa. And so it's very difficult to get foreign investment to be your first investment into a biotech because people don't know anything about Africa and are quite pessimistic about the prospects of anything so technical actually succeeding in Africa. And then on the other hand, African investors don't understand the revenue models of biotech and so are not really interested in investing. So I was caught between investors who would invest in biotech don't invest in Africa, and then investors who are in Africa and who invest in projects in Africa don't invest in biotech because they are not familiar with it. If I was going to pitch a real estate, if I wanted to build a block of flats, I'd have got money probably within a day or two, because everybody understands that, and that's how a lot of the high rises in Accra are being built. But I went to a few senior businessmen, men of incredible wealth themselves, who are proudly African and straight away connected with my vision. But because they are businessmen, they didn't understand how they would make money back. So they did not invest. So it was a lot of hard slog. I had countless meetings that ended up not amounting to much, or at least it appeared they were not amounting to much. But in hindsight, it was training me. So I was going through this. I wasn't getting money, but I was pitching. And each time I pitched, my pitch got better. And I was learning business lingo. I was learning to talk about KPIs. I was learning to talk the language of a businessman as a scientist. So that I came off not just as this talented young scientist who's very green in business, but I began to come across as a talented scientist who surprisingly understands a little bit about business. And so as I went through that process, I began to get different responses. But the thing that really made the difference for Yemaachi, and I think this is something that maybe other entrepreneurs in Africa should begin to look at, was the African diaspora. The first investments that Yemaachi got were from Africans, some of whom were ordinary people, doctors, lawyers, engineers, not mega wealthy people, but people with good, stable jobs, who are African, who have settled in the US, but wanted to contribute to Africa. And Yemaachi gave them an exciting way to, hey, I have $25,000, I have $50,000. I was going to put it into my 401k or something, but you know what? What you're doing sounds really cool. Yes, I know I might lose it, but I feel like I'm contributing. I can't go back home, but perhaps this $10,000 can do something to help people in Africa. And so getting enough of those people really helped us to get over that initial hurdle. And once you begin to raise money, it's a snowball. So then bigger funds begin to look at you because you've raised a little bit of money. And over time, FOMO, or fear of missing out, begins to kick in with investors. They're like, oh, we don't want to get left out. Maybe this is a good idea. It was very difficult in the beginning, but that initial confidence that a few people in the diaspora put in us allowed us to begin to raise. The last one I'll mention is just trying to get the logistics of running a business like Yemaachi is quite difficult. Or everything we use in the lab is imported. Logistics takes a long time. Research is expensive because the reagents we buy are expensive, and then you have to pay customs duty, which jacks up the price. So we're still dealing with that challenge, how to get a lab running and to do research competitively from Africa when everything we need is imported and has to be flown in or shipped in.
Well, speaking of import, taxes, clearly it seems like our African governments, need to do a lot more for researchers on the continent, right? The amount of government funding for R&D, it's very minute. I'm sure it's less than 1% of GDP for most African countries, right? So I'm curious how the government's been supportive of what you're trying to do. Are there ways that they've helped you in setting up or helped you in getting this dream on the road?
To be honest, we haven't had that much support from the government, but we also haven't necessarily gone out to look for it. I think it's safe to say that at this stage, African governments, including Ghana's government, have certain priorities. And investing in a startup like Yemaachi is probably not one of them yet. Part of the push to even found Yemaachi is exactly the point you made, that currently African governments spend, it's not even less than 1%, it's less than 0.5% of their GDP is invested in research. This is compared to the US, that I think it's like 1.4, if not 2% of GDP. And of course, the US GDP is considerably larger than any African country's GDP. So for the US to invest such a large proportion of its GDP shows the value they place on research. African countries don't have that. And so all the research in Africa is donor funded. So when I talked about being in a university and being frustrated, part of my frustration was we didn't get to set our own research agenda. It was set by the foundations and the charities and the governments that fund research. In Ghana, you have Noguchi Memorial Institute. It is primarily funded by the Japanese government. You have KCCR in Kumasi. It's funded by the German government. WACBIP, funded by the World Bank, by the Wellcome Trust, by the Gates Foundation. You notice I never said funded by the Ghana government because they don't receive anything from the Ghana government or from, before COVID, African Union was silent. Now at least we have Africa CDC doing a few things. But even Africa CDC gets majority of its funding from these same foundations like the Gates Foundation. So there is a huge gap or a huge lack of resourcing locally. But that is where I think biotech can come in. So my solution, everybody has been pushing. Whenever I got frustrated with hearing the same refrain, governments need to invest. Our governments need to invest. Whenever somebody like me raised the question that why is all our research funded by external sources, meaning basically controlled by foreign interests, if you wanted to be completely slightly cynical about it. The refrain I got was, yes, we need to push our governments. Our politicians need to understand the value of research. We need to get our governments to invest. That is true, but it's not a solution. You're just saying what they need to do, but in it itself, it's not a solution. And we all know if a politician is on a 4-year cycle, they're rather going to build a road or build a school or even build a hospital than invest in research, because the voting public will look at the road and say, oh, this MP built me a road. Whereas research, the results of research are more long-term and are less visible. So I felt that private enterprise has to get into research. As if we can have enough African companies that are doing research commercially and are succeeding, they begin to generate revenue that can be plowed into a research ecosystem. And that will then begin to catch the attention of government. So my solution is, instead of hitting politicians over the head and trying to bang our heads against the wall and say it over and over again that they need to invest without providing them any clear reasons why, I want to succeed from the private sector and then have the leverage to go to government and say, look what we are doing. Government needs to get in on this game because government itself could profit from research. So we've had support from the government through the Ghana Health Service. Some of the work that we have done, we have engaged with them and they've seen the value. But in general, right now, our approach is to do it privately. We're not asking the government for money. We're not asking the government for support at this stage, because we want to show what we can do and show that private sector can make a contribution, and then engage with government and hopefully begin to be in a position to help government to see that they need to contribute in this effort.
Amazing. Yeah, really, you're touching on a lot of really important points here. I think one of the things you did mention was changing the narrative around African research and around funding for biotechnology. Definitely, you have a game plan as a solution to that. It is really interesting because you are at the junction between health and a startup, with Yemaachi, right? And we're seeing a change in how African startups are viewed by the world, with more African startups getting funding even from Silicon Valley and getting even unicorns on the continent. So this year, every week almost, we're hearing about one of our African startups getting bought out. And so changing that narrative really is, like you said, changing it from funding perspective, but also from a science research perspective. And so a following question really will be about global health and the global cancer research, because that's your focus. What would you say is wrong with the way global health research is currently being practiced?
Everything. So even the name global health is problematic, right? What do they mean? Why is it that global health refers to health in the developing world? Like, global is everywhere, right? So you say the global economy, that doesn't mean the economy in Ghana and Africa. Global economy is everyone's economy, but somehow global health has been used to define or to explain health in developing countries. I think that's partly because it has become a business. It has become an enterprise that is controlled by certain powerful interests. And to be honest, at least speaking from Africa, we are complicit in our own continued colonization. Majority of these research projects that are done, or the science that is done, yes, it is funded from overseas, and that's unfortunate, and that puts our scientists at a disadvantage because the money is coming from Europe or from North America. But at the same time, our institutions do not have dynamic enough leadership to stand up to these funders. I think one of the legacies of colonialism is that Africans do not understand their own worth and do not put sufficient value on their own worth. If a funder wants to fund TB research, malaria research, HIV research, they have no choice but to do that research in Africa. And my frustration is why we don't realize that without us, they can't do what they are mandated to do. And so that's significant leverage. And so we should be able to push back sometimes when things are not as they should be. So I think global health in general is the biggest problem is the power structure. All the resources, all the money is coming from, I guess we could call it the West. All the work, obviously all the people who need to be helped are in the global South. And it sets up this dynamic of the haves and the have-nots and allows the haves to determine the agenda. And I think till you have true equity, where yes, we may be poor, but we have ways of contributing. Till that is recognized, and I think funders and international organizations take the stance of being allies as opposed to benefactors, I think global health will continue to be skewed. It makes me uncomfortable when you see so many papers, even with COVID. 20% of the publications that have been made on COVID-19 in Africa don't have an African author. How is that possible? You never see a paper about public health in England without English authors, or public health in America without American authors. But Africa has 54 countries, and you can have papers about research in Ghana or in Kenya or in Nigeria, and yet you have a completely whitewashed author list. And the question is, who are allowing that to happen? Yes, the funders are facilitating it, but the Africans themselves are sitting back and allowing this to happen. I think there's a lot wrong with global health. I think it stems from the fact that global health is steeped in the colonial past and has not been liberated. You go to the London School of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene. Why is the majority of the faculty white and male? At it for decades. And they've trained some of the best Africans in the field. And yet their faculty still looks like it's out of the 1960s. So the question is, do they just not trust their own products? Like, why are you not hiring all these young, vibrant, yes, some of them may want to go back home, but I'm sure a good number of them would love to get a job in London. Why are we not asking those questions? The problem with global health is that it is very colonial. And till that lack of equity is addressed, I don't really think global health is really going to help people it actually is intended to.
I just wanted to remind our listeners that in case they were in doubt, this is the Global Health Unfiltered podcast, and it was more than fitting to have Yaw be unfiltered. We want to have those conversations that a lot of people are having in the corridors, but that you don't find at the conferences within the top journals in the sector. So this is the conversation we want. We're really happy, Yaw, that you're speaking your mind and sharing this with us.
Yeah, I mean, unfiltered, definitely. I think this is so important because, we've been speaking in this kind of decolonizing global health space for a while. And I think a lot of it is about power, right? Even the way we frame this decolonized global health movement, we're talking about the injustices. But when we talk about it, it always frames Africans as being completely helpless and powerless. And that's a huge problem that I've seen with it, as if there's nothing that we can do to change some of these power asymmetries. Like, the patients are here on the continents. The TB research cannot be done without the patients who are Africans. Can you expand on what Africans, especially young Africans, can do to address these power dynamics?
I mean, I think if we take a lesson from our political, no one can free us except ourselves. And I fully agree with you. I feel even the decolonized global health movement itself is, I think it's full of well-meaning people. If you do a search on Twitter and hashtag decolonize global health, I think majority of the people who are speaking out are not African, right? Now, there's nothing wrong with them speaking out. We encourage support and should encourage people to speak out. I mean, apartheid was defeated with great contributions from white South Africa. So there is certainly a role for the non-African in the decolonized movement. But the decolonized movement has to be led by Africans. And my frustration has been with the current crop of African research leaders. In my opinion, they are not bold enough. They are too diplomatic. The time for diplomacy is over. I think of Kwame Nkrumah versus J.B. Dankwa in Ghana's history. One party had independence in the shortest possible time. And Nkrumah said, screw that, independence now. That is why Ghana was the first country to become independent. Because we had a man in Nkrumah who was not going to be politically correct about it, who was not going to be diplomatic. And he was going to say, you know what, enough is enough. We want our independence. We don't want it when it suits you. We want it now. So I think it has to come from within. And perhaps it should be the youth. Nkrumah was a young man when he came to Ghana and came at loggerheads some of the older statesmen who were a little bit more deliberate or slow in their action. I think there's a time for everything. There's a time to build consensus and to build support. But at a certain point, you have to just throw off the chains of tyranny and just make your points clear. And I believe African health research, whatever we want to call ourselves, that moment has come. I'm very grateful to those who went ahead of us because it has not been easy. I think we should not minimize how racist global health has been. We talk about how malaria was discovered. You see the videos. The white men are in jeeps and the black men are running behind the jeep through the bush. We have that history. And I think there's a certain crop of current leaders who have done some good work, have built research programs, but because they were brought up in a system where all the support came from overseas, I still find them a little bit too diplomatic and a little bit too enamored with pleasing the powers that be in the West. And I think you need the new breed, maybe I count myself in that generation, who are like, you know what, we don't owe anybody anything. I got my PhD because thankfully my parents could afford to send me to America to do my undergrad. Then I got a scholarship to get my PhD. I don't owe anybody anything for my PhD. Yes, I had professors who poured into me, but I don't owe some funder who took me from obscurity in the middle of Ghana and then sent me on a scholarship to go and learn. I think the problem is many of our current leaders, they were brilliant people, but they were stuck in Ghana or Nigeria or wherever they were. And then through the support of these funding agencies and these research programs, these colonial research programs, they were sent abroad to train and have come back and are leading these programs. So they owe a lot of their success to those programs. And I think they have a lot of loyalty. And so they can't necessarily throw the rattle out of the pram because they're like, oh, this is my old professor, I respect him. Even though the man is treating you maybe unfairly, or at least the system is unfair. And I think the young generation who have either been trained by other Africans or who have trained abroad but went there on their own steam need to step up and say, you know what, yes, we respect and we are collaborative, but no one should set our agenda for us. So I think that's the role of the next generation. We have to be bold and we have to be willing to be the Kwame Nkrumah to say independence now. No one gives up power voluntarily. So the London School is not going to cede control over global health to the University of Ghana unless the University of Ghana takes it and says, you know what, London School is great, but you're in London. We are in Ghana. Guess where the malaria is? It's in Ghana. It's in Nigeria. So the next, big conference on malaria, we are going to run it. You're welcome to attend. We want your money, but you don't control the agenda anymore. And we have to be willing that the conference will be small and we'll just have Coke and we won't have all the fancy, cocktails and all those things, but it will be ours, right? And I think we have to be willing to go broke and to support ourselves than to always go and enjoy the largesse of the institution at the risk of our birthright.
Yeah, young people, vibrant people to take up the mandates in global health like Yaw is doing over here. What advice do you have for young people in science? What can they contribute to global health coming from this part of the world?
I think the biggest thing we can do is take responsibility. I believe very strongly that no one can solve the problems that we face us. And actually, I think a lot of money is being thrown away because people are trying to solve them for us, but they're doing it in the wrong way. How many projects waste millions of dollars on overseas consultants who, yes, they may have an MBA from Harvard, but know absolutely nothing about what it takes to run a primary healthcare program in the middle of Kenya. The expertise, the knowledge, the ideas, I believe, are already in the continent. People just need opportunities to show what they can do. And so I think it's a call for young people to not give up, to be innovative, not to take the easy way out. but to stick it out. But then also for some of us who are maybe a little bit further ahead, who have access to some of these sources of funding. We have access to the establishment to try to find ways. And it may require some diplomacy. I'm not saying we go guns blazing all the time, but we need to try to pull some support to get the young innovators resources that will allow them to show what they can do. Because I really believe that if Africa is to turn a corner, begin to solve some of these great challenges, the answers are going to come from local people themselves. What they require is allies and support to allow that to happen. And I believe that, with the right engagement, some of these funding agencies and these organizations, which do have well-meaning people, they're not evil people, they're not bad people. I think many of them have their hearts in the right place. You could say some are there for power, yes, but I think there is possibility to engage them. But then ultimately, private enterprise, like I said before, in Africa, needs to step up to the plate. Our governments definitely need to step up to the plate. Because the more of our own projects we support, whether it's a private company supporting it or a government supporting it, the more we support, the more leverage we have to dictate the agenda. And we should be comfortable enough to say no to grant money if it doesn't help the situation locally, if it doesn't suit the terms that we think are best for us. And we should be bold enough to say no and back ourselves to either find the money elsewhere or for the funder to turn around and come back because they can't go anywhere else. On the wall of Yemaachi, we've written, "We must dare to invent the future," credited to Thomas Sankara.
Wow. Should we call you Martin Luther Yaw?
No. I'm not on that level.
Barack Obama.
Barack Obama.
What projects are you currently working on?
We have a number of projects currently in the pipeline where we're trying to build up research data around cancer. We are trying to set up partnerships not just in Ghana, but in currently in Nigeria and in Kenya, and hopefully with time we'll expand to other countries. Yemaachi's vision is a Pan-African vision. Even though we've started in Accra, we are headquartered in Accra. It's really important that we have a presence and we have activities, in many different African countries. So we're currently trying to work on partnerships. Even with Yemaachi, we have to be careful we don't have some sort of savior mentality. I think it's not just the white saviors. Probably the most damaging saviors we have in Africa are the African saviors who, maybe trained abroad or think they know everything and come in and try to tell everybody. So with Yemaachi, our model is really one of partnership. We are trying to build certain capacity, but we don't understand the context, even within Ghana, necessarily completely, and we certainly don't understand it all over the continent. So we're trying to establish key partnerships with people who themselves are trying to answer similar questions. And we are trying to see how the resources and expertise that we are trying to build would complement those efforts and allow us to together move the needle on understanding cancer. So we have a few projects in the works. One that I can talk about briefly is a project we are partnering with a US-based diagnostic company to do research on a new blood test for cancer. They call it a liquid biopsy. This is a test that is currently gaining traction in the US and some parts of Asia, but has never really been evaluated in a predominantly Black population. So this will be the first study of its kind, certainly trying to explore the utility of this in an African population. So we have that going on, and we hope to have a number of similar projects as well. On the non-cancer side, Ella mentioned my Callista's Juma Fellowship, and that is Gates money, so that is global health money. So I will take the money so long as they let me do what I want to do with it. So far, so good. But I was very honored to be selected as a Callista's Juma Leadership Fellow. And with that money, we are actually running COVID-19 immunology study, where we are trying to understand how Ghanaian people are responding to the COVID-19 vaccine from an immunological perspective. And we're actually going to directly compare our data with a matched cohort in the UK. Because there's evidence to suggest that people in Africa respond differently to vaccines. And this can have implications on how well the vaccines work. But unfortunately, as with most things, there's very little actual data being collected on this. So this was an opportunity to do that. So it's a long study, but we're quite excited for what it might mean. And beyond this particular study, the fact that a tiny biotech company that didn't exist over a year ago, that founded in 2020 and operational from April of 2021, can competitively secure a Gates Foundation grant, speaks to the fact that the audacious dream that we had in founding Yemaachi is not that crazy after all. Because you don't really get bigger than the Gates Foundation. For Yemaachi to have a Gates grant of this magnitude so early on in our development, I think speaks to the power of this model. And the fact that if you step up and you challenge the global health movement to get behind something different, you can have success. Because they typically invest in biotech, but not African ones, right? So we gave them one and we put it in front of them, and we're fortunate enough to get the money. So I think it speaks to the idea that you can be audacious. A number of people recommended I apply from the university because it will improve my chances. And so I took a risk by applying through Yemaachi. But I'm happy I did. And I think it emphasizes the point I've been trying to make.
Wow. This is exactly why I wanted to have you as our first guest. It's not just by chance. It's not by chance. Oh. We didn't just want to talk about the problems, but also really highlight an innovator, highlight someone, an African who is taking initiative to solve the problems and not just talking about the problems. Yeah, with every startup, there are some issues, some failures, initial failures, right? And I think the important thing is not to give up when you have those type of failures, right? But to learn from them and grow. So as you started Yemaachi, are there some failures that you've encountered, and how have you learned from those failures or that particular failure?
I'm sure the failures are coming. Thankfully, not too many so far. But
okay.
Like I said, would be in the fundraising. I have pitched to hundreds and hundreds of people, and it was hard. Because I knew what we were doing was exciting, and I just didn't understand why people couldn't get it. So but like I said, I look back and it was training, right? It was preparing me for bigger, more difficult pitches where I would be more polished. So I think the failures we've had probably initially would be around trying to raise funds. We continue to have to do that. Anybody who's in this business knows just how much money you have to raise. So we have to keep pushing. We did get into Y Combinator in Silicon Valley, so that was a big deal. We were the only Ghanaian company in our batch, and only one of 15. Another challenge we're currently facing is staffing. We all talk about the great African talent that exists, but to be honest, it's not always easy to find the right people. Maybe they don't just have to be talented, but they have to fit with the vision and the ethos of the company. You have to keep working at it. One area we continue to sort of deal with is maintaining focus and making the right decisions. As a young company, you're always making decisions that could carry significant weight, and we have to balance running a company and trying to find some revenue with what do we really want to do. And so those are things that we're always juggling.
Well, that's awesome that in your first year, you've not had, that many or major setbacks, right? Or discouragements. Let's not call them failures, but setbacks. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. We're very honored to have you as our first guest. Again, we wanted to highlight the issues that exist within global health, within the way healthcare is taught on the continent, the way research is being done. So you're the perfect person to do that. But we're also happy that you're not just talking about the problems, but you're actually doing something about it. So thank you so much for joining the podcast. For our listeners, would you mind giving some information about where they can learn more information about Yemaachi?
Yes. So we have a website. It's www.yemaachi.com. So YEMAACHI. We are on Twitter. So at Yemaachi Bio. So once again, there's 2 A's in there. So YEMAACHI, then BIO. So Yemaachi Bio. So follow us on Twitter. We're also on LinkedIn. The last couple of months have been good for us from a media perspective. There are a number of stories that have been written about the work we're trying to do. So if you just Google Yemaachi, there'll be a number of articles that will tell you a bit more about us. But on our website, we also have a news tab where we try to put some information. And we have a newsletter.
Sure. So many ways to follow Yemaachi, so there's no excuse for anybody not knowing how to get information on Yemaachi. We'll also put that information in the bio on the podcast episode. Yaw, thank you so much for joining us on this episode. We wish you the best and we're rooting for you. Don't forget about us.